Now, time for today's perspective, and the list appears endless, whether it's helping people facing hardship or fleeing war in countries like Libya, as we've seen on our special reports this week on France 24, whether it's helping people ravaged by floods and huge storms like in Mozambique, whether it's helping people suffering from disease such as Ebola or Zika, whether it's helping people whose homes and whole worlds have been destroyed by earthquakes and tsunamis in Indonesia. Well, the organisation often at the bottom of it all is the International Committee of the Red Cross, the organisation which this year asked for 2 billion Swiss francs to fund its mission, always at the forefront of humanitarian missions right across the world. And its president, Peter Maurer, he joins me now from the Paris Peace Forum, where he's due to be speaking today. I mean, you heard my list to introduce you there at the beginning. I mean, just some of the projects that you're involved in. I mean, is it slightly depressing to hear that list and how long it is and how many other projects of yours that I could mention there?
Well, indeed, it is sometimes depressing, discouraging to see this long list and to see it over a long time not decreasing. On the other hand, as an organization working at front lines, we also know that things individually can change with good humanitarian assistance and protection work being delivered in those circumstances. So we don't see only the list, we also see those whose lives have been preserved, who have been assisted, who have been protected, whose situations as fighters, as detainees, as civilians affected by conflict is improving. So it is, on the one side, depressing to see the cycle of violence, to see new dimensions of conflicts, and also the compounding of climate change, underdevelopment and conflict unfolding in front of our eyes. And on the other hand, we see the potential also of doing a lot of good and preserving, as is our kind of motto, humanity even amidst conflict.
Where do you think you've been able to make the most difference?
Well, I think the core of our mission remains to assist and protect people affected by armed conflict and violence. And this is where we operate, of course, most prominently. It's in Africa, in the Middle East, where our big operations are. If I look at impact, then of course what the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement is doing and is doing in response to natural disasters is probably easier than the conflictual response and has a huge impact. We have seen huge improvements over the last 15, 20 years by the international community, by local actors in responding to natural disaster. The complexity of war and violence today puts us in front of considerable challenges, in particular also with regard to the respect of basic rules and principles of international humanitarian law, and this is and remains a big challenge. So
and that's what you're talking about there at the Paris Forum, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, it's the 70th anniversary of the Geneva Convention, which is, I think, the most important, the most largely ratified international treaty to set out rules and behaviors in war and conflict. And I think it is important to commemorate this moment and also to encourage state and other armed actors to respect those laws and principles.
I mentioned that figure at the top there, that figure that you asked for this year of 2 billion Swiss francs. I mean, how on earth do you, A, get that money and then decide where to spend it? Where are your priorities?
Well, 2 billion Swiss francs sounds like a lot of money, but actually it isn't compared to the problems with which we are confronted. We have seen many other budgets increasing considerably over the last 10 years. I think that's commensurate to the problems which are increasing. Our fundraising as a organization which has a mandate from 196 states who have ratified the Geneva Convention is very much on the basis of engaging with states and having voluntary contributions by states to support our operations. And no surprise, the big OECD countries remain the major donors of our operations, but we have increasingly over the last couple of years also been able to encourage other emerging economies, in particular in the Gulf and in other countries of the world, to become important participants in our budget efforts and our efforts to increase the humanitarian response to crises today.
And where do you see that money starting to go more now? I mean, you mentioned earlier on climate change. I mean, presumably that is going to take more and more of that budget.
Well, I think the important thing is not to make those artificial silos between conflict, underdevelopment, development, and climate change. I think what the challenge today is that we need more money because climate change, armed conflict, violence, and underdevelopment are compounding to more important humanitarian problems which need to be addressed. If I look at the combination of challenges, the Sahel is certainly a region of particular concern because we see most prominently how climate change and the changing rainfall patterns and the changing agricultural patterns have an impact on shrinking lands and are spurring conflicts within communities, and this is certainly one of the concerns which is particularly prominent these days.
And I know that it's not just a physical thing, is it? A lot of the problems that you're trying to solve or help people with. I mean, it's also to do with mental processes, isn't it? I know you had a report recently talking about helping people mentally when they've suffered some kind of trauma or if they're fleeing some kind of war as well.
Well, indeed, with the increase of humanitarian needs, we have also realized that humanitarian needs are not just physical and fixed, but they are evolving. And one of the big developments that we have recognized over the last couple of years is indeed that the psychological impact of war and violence on people, the long-term psychological impact is considerable and has to be considered as an important humanitarian need for the future, which needs to be addressed, responded to, assessed in the context in which we live. If you look at all the children traumatized by armed conflict and what it means for their future lives, this is an important challenge that adds to the material, to the physical challenges in assisting people with water, sanitation, shelter, medicine, and other things which we have traditionally done. Also, I would like to highlight the traumas that, in particular, women, but also men are exposed to by sexual violence in conflict, which again is physical, but it is also psychological. So these are issues which become much more prominent, have become much more prominent over the last couple of years, and which we try to address in higher priorities today than beforehand.
Good to have you with us on the programme today. Thank you very much for speaking to us. That's Peter Mora from the Paris Peace Forum. He's there representing, or he's the president of the International Red Cross, speaking at that forum today here in Paris. Thanks for joining us on the programme today.